join. So I will be taking this class only for today, and from tomorrow she will be taking the class. Okay, so today we will be talking about the earliest Indian English writings. So basically, if we see that we will be talking here about the circumstances which enabled the rise of the Indian English literature and the nature of this literature during its formative years. So we will also we will also talk about the circumstances that enabled the rise of the Indian English literature, and as a very large network of educative and cultural activities. So if we will here prominently, we will talk about Ram Mohan Roy as a pre-eminent promoter of the Indian English letters in the era of early introduction and plan formation, and the influence of Roy as an aspiring Indian English writer of the 19th century, which we are going to talk. So basically, so do you have any idea about Indian English writings? Any one of you? Are you all listening to me? Chinmay, Pom Ganguly, Siddharth, Sanghamitra.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are audible,
Yes,
clearly audible.
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. Yeah. So do you have any idea about the Indian writing in English?
No, sir, not much.
No. Okay. Pom Ganguly. Okay. Siddharth. Okay. Fine. So basically, if we see that in the book, the politics of Indians English, which is by N. Krishna Swami and Archana Burdig, which has divided the history of English in India into five phases. So first is, if you see, it is 1600, where the year of the East Indian Company was started, and 1813, this was when the East India companies chartered, which where it was chartered because it wanted to have trade and commerce in the Indian subcontinent, and it was renewed. Then in 1857, this was the mutiny year, where this was also the year where when the first three universities were set up at one was at Bombay, one was at Calcutta, and the other one was Madras, the then Madras, right now Chennai. And in 1904, the year of the Indian Universities Act was passed, which gave the British government a tighter control over the higher education in India. And finally, in 1947, uh, what happened in 1947? Yes, who
We
can?
got our independence.
Yes, 1947 we got our independence, and the year India, became politically independent. So basically, the phase that we see between 1813 to 1857, when the East India Company was chartered, and the mutiny year, when the three universities were set up. Well, the most important development which took place during that period, for where you see the rise of the Indian English writing was there. Okay, so what happened in this period
Excuse
in
me, sir.
1800?
Sir, is it
Yes.
Is it from 1913 to 1957, the rising period?
1813, 1813.
Okay, sir. 1813 to 1957.
Oh, 18, 1857, madam.
Okay, 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 sir. Thank you.
Okay. Any doubts?
No, sir. Please continue.
Okay. So then what happened, when in 1813, when, this renewing the charter permitting the, East India Company to carry on with its trading and commercial activities in the Indian subcontinent, we found that the British government and the British Parliament attempted to make, the company more accountable to British interest than earlier. And then we found the East India Company had functioned with a narrower limit of trade, not concerning itself with political issues and social ideas. But you see, then there was a lot of um, you know um, in these activities you see that it would made or to be assumed very larger, though it was less tangible parameters were there. And as per the Pitt India Act, Pitt's PITTS, Pitt's India Act of 1784, the company was answerable in a very minor and a way of major matters to the British Parliament and the British government. And then what happened? This was, in spite of the fact that, the parliament or government did not, directly control the administration of Indian affairs. So what happened is the charter which was renewal was accompanied by advice that the company make itself more responsible and more responsive towards the welfare of the natives through taking their territories where these company was operating from. And from 1813, what happened? The company was given the specific, charge of educating the natives, appealing to them at a very different level. And then, as the company's, Indian affair, if we talk about the Indian affair, which expanded from, beyond Bengal and the Deccan and its original locations in India and into other Indian states. What were the other Indian states? Indian states were Baroda, Hyderabad, Pune. Pune is, Pune that we right now we call Pune. It was Pune, and this company also engaged in its educational enterprises by setting up, up or helping to set up colleges in Calcutta, in Delhi, in Agra, in Pune. And you find in Calcutta, the Hindu college was there, which came up due to individual initiative of certain educated, Bengali people. Okay. And they abetted by the English officials, and all others were, the outcome of the patronage of the East India Company. So all these, you find colleges were colleges for Oriental learning and education in English language and English literature, and about we can say the West as a whole was provided only at the Hindu college, and Hindu college was where? Where was Hindu college?
In Kolkata.
Yes, in Calcutta. That time it was Calcutta. Correct. Okay. So am I clear till this?
Yes, sir.
Siddharth? Siddharth, can you hear me? Chinmay,
Yes, sir.
Chinmay, are you clear till this?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, okay, fine. Okay, so then, see, this is very important. You need to know, how the rise of Indian English took place. And then you find the companies, education policy, which took a, on a definite anglistic direction. You see, the during that period, the governor and the general in council adopted in 1835 for the provinces under its preview, that is Thomas Babington Macaulay Minute on Education. Okay, so this was written by Thomas Macaulay, a Minute on Education, which was recommending that Britain officials support English education in India, and it also, withdraw the support to Arabic and Sanskrit education. So Macaulay, argued that English is better worth, knowing than Sanskrit and Arabic, and that you find the natives and the desirous to be taught English, and that it is possible to make natives of this country thoroughly a good English scholars. So you find in 1837 the missionaries had to begin, to have a significant part in the facilities for teaching English. So these missionaries were involved in teaching English, and English became, the language of administration and judiciary in India. So even as you find the vernaculars, they continued, to be used in several instances, and you find almost, simultaneously subordinate level of positions in the judicially and the administrative institutions were thrown or open to the Indians by a government resolution. And then what happened in 1853? Uh, yeah, in 1853, I told you what had happened. What happened in 1853? It was, the year when the company's charter was renewed once more. Okay. First, it was renewed when? In 1800? Timelines are important. 1800
Sir, is
when?
it 1813? No.
18, sorry, madam, once again.
Is it 1813? No.
Yes, correct, correct. 1813. Initially, it was 18. It is means first it got chartered then, and then a renewed one was in 1853. Okay, after how many years? After 40 years.
40,
Okay.
sir. 40. Yes, sir.
And under the pressure of the, government personnels to manage, the widening domain of its Indian activities, you find the company decided to open up its highest civil service appointments to Indians by allowing them to appear for a competitive exam setup for this purpose. So Indian were given chance during that period. So you find the the as a follow up of the Woods Dispatch of 1854, you find the first, formalized and formulated education policy statement of the East India Company. There were three universities which were established in 1857. There were three places. What were the places?
Hyderabad,
Sir.
Pune, Baroda.
No, no, that way, that were different. The initial three universities which were set up in 1857 was Calcutta. Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras, now Chennai. Okay. So what happened is the English education, endangered two kinds of writing of English by Indians in, addition to already available genres of the bureaucratic writing. So you see, these were the journalistic communication and the freelance compositions, and the English, print media was used both, publishing both the, kinds of writing. So these were, some of the earliest specimens of the Indian English writing, and what they did is they brought out the need of on the, part of British to communicate things directly and usefully to Indian populace. So if then we will if we see, the beginning of the Indian English writing in India, you see, um, uh, here there were, many, writers, poets, and you see, look, if we take a look into the, origin of the Indian English poetry in India, would not be, misplaced. And Makarand Paranjape is had, said that two related preconditions that had to be met before is the Indians could write poetry in English. And he had mentioned that it was, the two related preconditions that had to be met was before a condition was set up, which was said that the Indians were able to write poetry in English, and the two preconditions are what he has called the Indianization of English language. Okay, and the, Anglicization of the Indians. So you find this in his book, Introduction to Indian Poetry in English. And you see, the first precondition which was met with the landing of Vasco da Gama. Vasco da Gama, landed in Kerala in 1498. Okay, and, trade routes came to be established between Portugal and India. Why did Vasco da Gama came to India? For what was the purpose? I'm sure you must have read this in history. Anyone?
Sir, can you please repeat once again the question?
I said, why did Vasco da Gama came to India? What was the purpose of his coming to India?
Business?
Trade, commerce.
Trade affairs, yes, sir. To establish trade affairs in India.
Mm. So you find, the trade routes came to be established between, Portugal and India when Vasco da Gama came. And uh, there you find that a number of Indian words found their way into Indian, the usage of English. In the usage of English, we found that the Indian words were used, and closely on the heels of the, Portuguese followed the English, the Dutch, and the French traders who not only, opened up trade routes, but also, they colonized the several settlements in India, particularly after the historic Battle of Plassey in 1775, which was between the British and the Indians. So you see, as we all know that, English were the only ones who would not only establish trading links with India, but also it came, to rule India for more than 150 years. And this happened particularly, when after the British East India Company came, which was set up, and this British East India Company was set up in which place? Any idea? Siddharth, are you there? Siddharth, can you unmute yourself? Okay. So basically, yes, yes, madam.
Is it West Bengal, sir? I'm
Yes,
confused.
correct. Bengal. So it was set up, the British East India Company was set up at Bengal. And moreover, you find many English men in India, began writing, poems on Indian subject matters, and so this was the first precondition, and the second precondition came up to be fulfilling when England came to a major colonial power in the 18th century. Not only in India but also all over the world. So the necessitized a colonial practice that covered various aspects of life including literary writing. So you find the Indian poetry in English, the earliest Indian English poetry which came to be written in Bengal, as Bengal was where the British first established a foothold, and the literary activity surrounding the writing of Indian English poetry too came to be centralized in the Bengal, particularly if we say in Calcutta only, because you find in it became a totally urban phenomenon, and not only it was a phenomenon of the city, but also it was confined to few established Bengali families. So from there on, you find it was spread to Madras and to Bombay, and even more, than 150 years later, it has, not lost the peculiar characteristic of being an urban phenomenon. So, since you find in those days, one needed to belong to a certain section. Okay, so in order to be, English educated, and Indian English writers were, largely they were upper class and caste people, and and you find they were this basically the influence, the choices of the theme and the subject as well. And you find later when earliest Indian English writers began writing poems in English, there were many English men and women in India who were also writing about Indian themes, about Indian subject matters. And in those days, the poetic writing by either the English men or women, or by Indian writers writing in English, and were not distinguished from each other, and these poems were clubbed under the broad banner of the Anglo-Indian writers. So with the passage of time and India's independence from foreign rule, you find Anglo-Indian literature as literature were written by the English in India, which came to a gradual end. And from then you find various terms came to be employed to describe the literary activity, which was called the writing poetry by Indian writers in English. So these terms like Indo English, Indian literature in English, all these came into popular usage after this, and these these were descriptive in nature, and it avoided as they do not attempt as a definition. So we have adopted the term Indian English writing since Indian English, which is now a global phenomenon. So you find it needs to be pointed out that even today, Indian English writing, including the poetries, the short stories, then the drama, all these are still largely an elite and urban phenomenon. So it should also be pointed out even that saying that Indian writing in English also faces very serious charges, one of them being the most of what is written under the broad umbrella that is called the Indian English writing has nothing called Indian about it. So you see, it appears that the Indian English writing, you see its fault, which continue to survive through the ages. And then you find that there were, many people who talked about the Indian writing in English. Am I audible and am I clear to all of you?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Then we find Raja, Ram Mohan Roy. Raja Ram Mohan Roy, tracked a very on a defense of Hinduism in 1857, which was regarded as the earliest enterprise at the original in Indian English writing. And you find the scion of an aristocrat Bengali household. If Ram Mohan Roy was born in a village named Radhanagar in Hooghly district of Bengal, and he was born to an orthodox and conservative Bengali Brahmin parents. So you see, there was not much chronicled information about his early life, but yes, what is known however is he did his elementary education in a village school in Bengali, which was his mother tongue. And when he was 12 old, he left home and joined a Muslim school in Patna to study Persian and Arabic. Okay. So, this, helped him to read the Quran as well as a Sufi saint in the original. And though the medium of these two languages, he then taught himself the principles of Islamic religion and culture. And from this vantage point of an alternative to Hinduism, he began to criticize Hindu orthodoxies. So you find at the age of 16, his anti-Hindu, posturing incensed his father to such an extent that he was expelled from home, and Ram Mohan Roy was used this opportunity to travel, far and wide, when he was expelled from the house. And later, you find that he went to the northern Indian and spent 3 years in Tibet in his quest of knowledge of Buddhism. And he traveled to Banaras to study Sanskrit, all the while acquiring knowledge on several religions, especially Hinduism, and whose, text he read in details at Banaras. And reconciliation with his, father brought him back to Calcutta, and then he was employed with the East India Company in 1803. And you find, if you see, his employment was, with the company sent him on a posting to Rangpur in 1809, where he met, Marwadi Jains, and learned about Jainism from them, and he started studying Jain texts. So his initiation, you see, into Western ways of life, sharpened not only his critical attitude towards Hindu practices, but also it prompted him to justify Hindu, percepts that were often, misrepresented by the Hindu priesthoods. And then Rammohn Roy, you see, was largely, remembered as a man who fought to abolish sati. If you remember, you must have read earlier sati. The Hindu social practice of wife immolating herself on her husband's funeral in order to for him to get salvation. So that Sati, as the founder of Brahmo Samaj, he abolished this Sati Pratha. And um, in 1815, Rammohn Roy resigned, from the East Indian Company and came back to Calcutta. And he was, dissatisfied with the system of education which was
Sir,
prevalent.
15 na 50?
1815.
Thank you, sir.
1815. Yeah. Yeah. So what happened is, um, so he was and he came back because he saw that the education system in India and the method of teaching English was very poor. So he informed an association with the help of both Hindu and English scholars. And even, he started a school where he introduced several modern subjects like, science, mathematics, political science, and English. All these subjects were introduced. And like the other nationalists of his age, he was against the British rule in India, and you find he was was constrained with the writings of English and as a language available to both the set of readers. And this, also served to keep him away from both the sets of readers. And then you find, yes, we must. This is a very important thing that Raja Rammohn Roy was a preeminent promoter of the early Indian English writing. So, in volume 8 of the history of Indian literature, which has been written by, remarked by Sisir Kumar Das, saying that Roy was the first important bilingual Indian writer to write in English in the 19th century. So you find between 1817 and 1820, Now, apart from his writing of defense of Hindu theism, Roy, translated a abridged version of the Vedas, the Kena, the Isha, the Katha Upanishads into English as well as into Bengali. And he used Bengali as well as English as his campaign against the idol worship and the sati pratha that we say, and the ill treatment of widows in the Hindu society. So, and this was as well as his criticism to the Christian missionaries. In fact, you find he also translated his major writings in Bengali into English, and it was imperative for him to use English extensively for his writings, because of his writings represented a very continuous conversation with both the intelligentsia of Britain and the intelligentsia of non-Bengali communities of India. You find that except in his translations, Ram Mohan Roy, English prose is very powerfully, polemical, and you find in the, you know, text of which was the text and illustrated history of Indian literature in English, which is written, edited by um, Mehrotra, Arvind Krishna Mehrotra, is written that the evolution of Ram Mohan Roy as a writer in English reflects not merely his growing confidence in the cause that he is espoused, but also his deepened facility in the fluency of his use of language. So. Uh, Raman Roy was especially at home while English writing by the last decade of his life, during which he authored some of his most magnificent pamphlets, including the petitions against press regulations, which was in the year 1823, which was drafted by him and signed along with him by the supporters. And then you find Roy advocated the Western education and the social change, and was, promoter of the translation of Hindu sastras into vernacular languages, and even, as a promoter of the English journalism. So he made, a great effort in transmitting English scientific and literary, texts into Uh, Bengali as well, and such diversity you find enabled him to have comprehensive view on the developments in India. So, you know, coming to the question of press regulations, it is very important fact that Raman Roy's activism and the passing of the government ordinance in the same year suppressing the freedom of the press occasioned petitions about the press regulation. And following that, he had many attempts in reforming the native society by weeding out some of the corrupt customs of Hindu society, which went on unabated, and you find he founded the Brahmo Samaj in 1828, and which was the earliest endeavors of its kind in the 19th century. And this was to revitalize Hinduism. So, but during the last years of his life, you find Ram Roy was, wrote a short, autobiographical sketch at the request of his friends. And this short sketch is of interest as the pioneering exercise in the Indian English writing in a genre that flourished and flowered in many, you know, many directions during the century. So you find Roy was essentially a humanist and a religious reformer, and he had entered the service of the East India Company, where he rose to great heights. But he left the company in order to serve the people. So he was well versed in Sanskrit text of Hindu as well as Muslim, or the Islam, and was very much influenced by the liberal thinkers of the Western world. And you find he also decided, that he needed to reform Hinduism, and that he perceived as the evils of Hindu society. And with this in mind, he formed the Brahmo Samaj in Calcutta in 1828, and he propagated the abolition of sati and advocated widow remarriage. And this is how it went on. And Roy's view on women in India, if you see that, would be a particular significance. But being a reformer and an social activist, Roy would place the plight of Indian women into overall change. That envisaged in the contemporary society. And so you find, by the years, Roy's death, a group of student educated at Hindu College, Calcutta, had emerged on the scene of Indian English writing, and known as the Young Bengal Group. These students, started an English magazine called Pantheon. Pantheon was this name of the English magazine, in the pages, of which they discussed the controversial and the social issues, which were very superstitious in the Hindu society. Even they focused on the status of women and the class disparities in India. So, uh, in this context, we find, in context of the 19th century particularly, this went far beyond that. What could be termed as called reform. Okay, so the youth of the day, wished that this country could, come as close to the modern attitude as possible, and this would pave, the way of a vibrant, resurgent India in the days to come. So you find the Indian national movement owed a great deal of efforts of figures such as Raja Rammohn Rai, Derozio, Kashi Prasad Ghosh, all these figures. So with you find, so these were some of the people who took uh, Indian writing in English in different to another level. Do you have any doubts till this? Sangamitra, Siddharth, Pom?
Yes, sir. That the meanwhile you discussed that the history of English literature went on with five phases.
Hmm.
But that phases I could not write, or I missed it. I'm not
You
getting the
want,
things.
okay, you want to write the phases?
Yes, because I have written some notes. That five pages I have written. That pages also I have distributed, but nothing has written that. I think you skipped or I skipped. You made
No,
a
no,
point. Uh-huh.
I told you the phases, right?
Hmm.
I
Yes.
told the phases 1600 to 1947. I told all the five phases.
Yes.
1600 was the year of the East India Company was started.
Yes.
1813 was the year when the East India Company's charter was renewed.
Yes, sir.
Then in 1857 was the mutiny year. The
Yes, sir.
mutiny year, all the three universities were set up.
Yes, sir.
The universities were set up at Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras.
Yes, sir.
In 1904, the Indian University Act was passed, and this gave the British government a tighter control over higher education in India. And in 1947, India got politically independent. So these are the all phases, five phases.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Any doubts? Hello? Any more doubts? Pom uh, Ganguly?
No, sir. No, sir.
No.
No, sir. It's very clear.
Okay. And Chinmay?
No, sir, no doubts.
Siddharth, do you have any questions? Because this is the introduction part. Siddharth, can you hear me? Okay. So moving ahead, um, we will talk about yes, we'll talk about Henry Louis Vivian Desrosiers and the early voices of the identity. You see the Hindu College, Calcutta, where the propagation of the English studies in India was there. So we'll talk about that and how Henry Desrosiers and his nationalistic fervor. You find the Desrosiers and the English, the young Bengal movement. Okay, so here you find that the story of Derozio, which is in sense inseparable from the story of Hindu College, Calcutta, where he served as a teacher of English, and one that had a profound impact upon his life, as it had upon the lives of many other English authors. Uh, so here you find the uh, in the early 19th century, the East Indian Company pushed into actions in areas where they other than trade by the British government and the British Parliament, who started to involve itself in the educational advancements of Indians. So we see that the company was set up or was helped to set up colleges in several cities in India, including Calcutta, Pune, that time Pune, Delhi, Agra, and the policy framework came from the British government. All the colleges, more or less were, centers of Oriental learning. So you find only the Hindu College, Calcutta, was disseminating knowledge, and the Hindu College, which now is known as the Presidency College, if you know, the Presidency College, which was
Yes, sir.
founded not, yeah, which was not founded, not so much because the company, decides its establishment, but in fact, you see, the pressure was put on the company officials by a group of Bengali gentlemen who wished their children should have been benefited by the Western education. So then, Ramman Roy was a party to the talks held in 1816, and this led to the setting up of the college, but his role ended there since the other Bengali gentlemen, all these Hindus who were with him in the project disapproved of what was deemed to be his anti-Hindu sentiments and his pro Muslim and pro Christian stances. So for this reason, you see, perhaps Roy never, made it to membership of the committee that was constituted to manage the college. And you find the Hindu, gentry at the helm of the affairs in Hindu college in its formative years, thus tried to bring the Western philosophy and the technology, and to a certain extent, specifically the language and literature of the English people of to their offspring. So, or clearly, they were frightened by the prospects of their contamination from cultures alien to their own, and then the aims of Hindu college was laid down in its charter, which convey a sense of uneasy balance of the East and the West, and that its founders sought to maintain in their conception of the college. So you find this opened a whole possibility of mutual interaction as well as an antagonism. So you find during this period, um, if we talk about this English teacher Henry Louis Vivian Derozio, he was born in April 1809 in Calcutta of Eurasian patronage, and at the age of 6 years he enrolled at this called Dharmotala Academy, which was run by David Drummond. And at 14, he finished school and joined Messrs. J. Scott and Company. And you find the employers of his father to, earn his livelihood as a clerk. So at 16, he left for his aunt's indigo plantation in Bhagalpur. And later, he spent the next 3 years and wrote much of his poetry. So he sent, his poems to the Indian Gazette under the pen name of Juvenis, and which encouraged the editor John Grant, decided to collect his poems. And at 18, he came back to Calcutta and was appointed assistant editor of the Indian Gazette by Grant, and who helped to publish his poems in a very in a single volume. So you find he was his repute as a writer in English spread to such an extent that within a few years he was selected to teach English language and literature at Hindu College. And his stay at the college was eventful but brief, for he was dismissed from its service within 3 years of joining. Mm. And you find after his dismissal, he returned to journalism, and not for long, as he suffered the attack of cholera and died in December 1831. So you find, Derosio's interaction with the students, basically in the college premises, but outside the college, also you find he was very deeply involved. And one forum of these exchanges was the Academic Association. This was a debating club, and this club academic association was started by Derozio, and over which Derozio himself he would preside over it. And the academic association inevitably attracted the attention of the company officials who now then attended this meeting and all. Mm, so and he shaped his practice, the new aesthetics of India that would inspire the future generations of writers to struggle for dynamic idioms. So Derozio, you find, was earlier, maybe regarded as one of the earliest Indian English poets, whose commitment to India was commendable. But you find being of Eurasian patronage at the time when his own community would have repudiated his mixed origin, and he chose to give something to India that he describes as his native land. And in his sonnet to India, my native land, I'm sure if you have read this poem, To India, My Native Land, he talks about the glorious past of India before colonization and how India was revered and worshipped as a deity. But he also, laments the fact that that glory and that reverence is no more now. So he takes upon himself to restore India's, the fallen state. And all he desires from his chosen land is what he calls his native land, one kind wish from thee. And he says this, the wish to be seen, to be accepted, and to be recognized as an Indian poet and not a Eurasian. So he laments the fact that India is under foreign rule and feels the need for India to awaken. In another poem, where he mentions in the poem The Harp of India, where he says, but if thy notes divine may be by mortal wakened once again, harp of my country, let me strike the strain. So this is these are from the poem The Harp of India. So this burning, nationalistic fervor, this zeal of, unusual for the person of Eurasian origin. You find, N.K. Naik considers Derosio's poems to be as he says in his book of history of the Indian English, he says he has mentioned that leave an unmistakable authenticity of patriotic utterance, which stamps Derosio as an Indian English poet who's truly a son of the soil. So this says that he was more a son of the soil. Okay, he was involved. He was more an Indian than Eurasian. Am I clear to this? Am I clear? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir.
Any doubts till this?
No, sir.
Okay. Then next is Derosio, and the young Bengal movement. So you find in the earlier section of Derosio's book, we talked about Derosio's personal intellectual biography of the young Bengal movement, which was introduced. And here you find Derosi was one of the earliest activists to wage war against the traditional Orthodox society of India in general and Bengal, which is in particular. So, though Derosio died young, his brilliant but short literary career was was associated with literature, with the moral, with the social, with the political improvement of his countrymen. So, you find Jerosi himself was extremely well, read person, having having read a vast array of literary and extra literary texts from the Greek and the Roman classics to more, modern texts such as the Rights of Man by Thomas Paine and the works of the Romantic and the Victorian poets. But you find his readings filtered down to his writings, and that were no means prolific, given this all his too brief span of life. And later you find, instead of being a direct uh, he stood for the spirit of freedom and liberty, and he born during the era of the colonial Raj, and he loved independence, and this love for independence is one of the characters of his work, as which was evident from the ode to independence. So he has written a number of poems, and the very known poem which he has written is a noteworthy trait of Derosio's writing in the nationalistic fervor. So you see not only in his journalism but also in his poetry poems such as To India, My Native Land, The Harp of India, and to the pupils of a Hindu college are the excellent examples which, you know, there's a very strong assertion of patriotism which stamps Derosio as an Indian English poet whose Indianness supersedes his Englishness. Okay. So, and his poetry, he introduces images, ideas, emanating out of his several sense of, national belongings. And poetry, example, the highest Himalaya poetry, and you find there are a lot of images and the ideas which he has tried to, put it. So Derosio, his influence over the students of Hindu College, Calcutta, was so convincingly, find that they had the fact that they dismissed from the service of Hindu College barely, 3 years after he joined its service, allegedly, because he motivated his students to be hostile to Hinduism and to be, established customs of the country. So, and you find for Derosio, preached a secular nationalism and preached it so passionately that he won innumerable converts to his cause, and his converts included, upcoming young men such as, Krishna Mohan Banerjee, Mahesh Chandra Ghosh, Ram Gopal Ghosh, Gobind Chundar Baisak, Amrita Lal Mitra, and also Dakin Arjun Mukherjee. So many of them, took to intellectual pursuits and provided literary writings inspired, by their mentors. So there is your, applied, the radical English thoughts to the existing views in India, and in the individual case of Derozio, the secular notions of behavior posed a threat to what was considered the native Indian ethos. So this is all about Henry Derozio. So you might get a question, how was Henry Derozio's, role in the Hindu college, into the limelight of the intellectual world of the early 19th century of Calcutta, and or you can they can ask you the mm, character of Derozio as a literary output. Okay. Uh, any doubts till this? Any doubts? Hello.
No, sir.
Okay. Are you all getting me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just give me 2 minutes. I'll be back. Just give me 2 minutes. Okay. Yes. So, do you have any doubts till this, or should we move ahead?
Sir, please move ahead.
Okay. So then we will talk about Michael Madhusudan Dutt. So Michael Madhusudan Dutt, you find um, the involvement of Madhusudan Dutt with Hindu College, Calcutta. And Madhusudan Dutt was a student who had to, leave the institution, who was you know, a student of Hindu College, and had to leave the institution prematurely because of the, as a result of the lessons he learned there, he converted to Christianity from Hinduism. And an account of his life, you see, and the new, name he acquired under his new, religion, which will be provided, and so here I will tell you about the literary output of the in English, the language which he began to, write as an author. So Michael Madhusudan Dutt uh, is very often, um, rated as one of the greatest poets between Bharat Chandra Rai and you know Ravindranath Tagore. And we find he was responsible for innovating different forms and types that eventually, altered the course of Bengali
Excuse me, sir.
literature. Yes, please.
Sir, actually the name is Michael Madhusudan Datta. So Madhusudan Dutt is okay, it is Indian name, but Michael, is it the title given to him or?
Yeah, I'll come to his biography.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. So initially he was known as Madhusudan Dutt. Okay. Am I clear? Hello.
Yes, sir.
So he was, responsible for innovating the different forms and types that eventually, altered the course of Bengali literature. And his contribution to the literary writings in Bengali had a very blank verse. And his contribution also, have been noticed very largely in the field of Bengali literature. So he was born, Madhusudan Dutt as Madhusudan Dutt in 1824 and was educated in Hindu College and Bishop's College at Kolkata. And he is said to have, converted to Christianity in order to avail himself of free education at Bishop's College. And these, points of information which help, us to understand that there were various, shift witnessed in his, writings. So, unlike Derosio, who was a faculty of the Hindu college, Dutt was in the institution as a student then. Okay, and he arrived at college 2 years after Derosio departed from it, and but came to imbibe many of the same ideas that Derosio had tried to take to his students. And he wrote, extensively in English in his early writing years. And the chief inspiration he had drawn it from Captain David Lester Richardson, one of the luminaries of the teaching staff of Hindu College of those days. And Richardson was a poet, and you find his works has been published in many of the reputed journals. So besides, he was an extremely, gifted professor whose pedagogy had been praised, by no less a man than Macaulay. And with the encouragement of the captain Richardson, Madhusudan came into, contact with several literary journals of India. And some of the literary journals were like, the Bengal Spectator, Literary Gleaner, Calcutta Literary Gadget, Literary Blossom, some of these, and some more. So you find his expressions then was, imitative of the English model, and therefore largely inconsequential in terms of literary merit. And thus you find, Madhusudan Dutt was, he was born in at on January 25th, 1824, in the village of Sagar Danri in Bengal. And uh, you find he was born to Raj Narayan and Jhanavi, who were an educated couple, and they, ran a prosperous household. And when the couple's other sons, both younger than Madhusudan, they died, the family moved to Calcutta, and the location of Madhusudan's first formal schooling was in from Calcutta. And then you find Madhusudan attended the grammar school um, at Lal Bagh, in which now, along the other disciples, he was taught Latin and Hebrew. And after 5 years in this grammar school, Madhusudan joined the Hindu College, Calcutta, and this was during the year 1937. Okay, and then he had a deep admiration for these European, language, literature, culture, society, religion, and that is very evident in Madhusudan's early writings, which was rooted in the contrast that Hindu college people perceived, between Europe and their, own country. So then you find, you find uh, the contrast was, you find, was very significant, since it was symbolized the fight of the new and the old. And you find C.H. Cameron, who was a member of the Governor General's Council, records this sense of antithesis even in an essay that earned Madhusudan a gold medal awarded. So his aversion of things Indian, or at least to things Hindu, drove him to convert in 1840 from Hinduism to Christianity. And some things that diluted the spirit of the struggle that he had so far waged. And perhaps you find the answer, which did not lie in Christianity but in the modern enlightened point of view. And then you find the conversion resulted in the rupture between him and his family for a while, and his college forever. And undeterred, he enrolled for the studies of Bishop College, which he attended in 1847. So around this period, there happened to decline of his parents' fortune, and realizing that he would, be there. Uh, just a minute. Just give me 1 minute. Yeah, sorry, I had to change my network. Okay, so yes, so then realizing that he would not be able to receive much support from them. Now by then because he was more towards the Christianity, he was now known as Michael Madhusudan. Sanghamitra, do you understand the question you were asking?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So and then what happened? Michael Madhusudan decided to tap his own potential, and sustaining himself by moving, with the Tamilian friends to Madras, and soon, he settled down there and married Rebecca, who was an inmate of the orphan asylum to which he was attached as a tutor. And there, they had four children and had a very happy married life. In Madras, as in Calcutta, Michael Madhusudan wrote, without remission. But most of his writings were still molded upon foreign models, and some of his writings appeared in the Madras, circular under the pseudonym of Timothy Pen Poem. So if his shorter poems were written in Calcutta, in Madras, Michael Madhusudan attempted his longer poems such as Vision of the Past and The Captive Lady, and there are so many which he had written. And while he was in Madras, he lost his parents and received a word from his friend, and that his family inheritance was about to be appropriated by his cousins. And these events made him hasten back to Calcutta in 1856, leaving his wife Rebecca and four children behind in Madras. And though his first marriage was very never annulled, and he married a second time with the year of returning to his native. And Michael Madhusudan had three children from his second marriage. And you find most of his works. There are many works in Bengali, which is written by Michael Madhusudan, like Sarmishtha. Sarmishtha is a play which was published in 1859, and then there are other plays also. Um, বুড়ো সকালে সকালের ঘরের ওন Padmavati. All these were, plays which were published in 1860. And Tilotama Sambhava Kavya. These are some of the poems. A poem which was published in 1860. Uh, then Krishna Kumari, which was also a play which was published in 1861. So this is how and then what happened. You find Michael Madhusudan set sail for England, thereby fulfilling a lifelong dream, reaching London, and to set up a training to be a barrister. And despite being dogged by the financial hardship, he managed to qualify as barrister at law in 4 years, and surviving under straitened circumstances. He, however, did not cease to write while in England, or briefly in France. And he wrote a number of sonnets, among which one entitled is Bongo Bhasha. Bongo Bhasha, which tells of a dream in which his muse advises him to give up his beggar's garment and recover the mass of jewels in your mother's lap. The mass of jewels is a clear reference to the Bengali language in most of his writings abroad were an unmistakable pinning of his national heritage, his language, his literature and culture, and even his sonnets, which were written on the European masters during his phase of Michael Madhusudan career, and couched, into the Bengali idiom. And you find Madhusudan was back to Calcutta again in 1867. Um, yeah, and he was, trying to, he tried to establish himself in the bar, and after facing difficulties, he managed to be registered, to register as a barrister. And his earnings were less and modest, and he were always, spent more than his earnings. And his confirmed alcoholism too, came into way of his effective practice. And so you find his literary writings. Madhusudan began to write in the English during his days at Hindu College, and some of his poems also, as I said, that it was published in the contemporary Indian English periodicals. And Madhusudan poems in English encapsulated a wide variety of his language, versity, and you find that his poems were very famous and was taken to a different level. And Michael, like Derozio, was highly influenced by the Romantic poets. So that drew his inspiration from Byron, as obvious from the manner in which he tries to evoke, Muhammad Ghazni's, vision of the contemplated slaughter of the besized Hindu of the old Delhi. And you see in India, into where these early Indian English poets were born, and was a country that had lost its own glory. Like we saw, we talked about it in the beginning. So a country that was, reeling above under the yoke of imperialism and colonial Raj, a country where poets and writers could not, do nothing but look towards the past and to glorify the past of the free India. So both, freedom and glory had become relics and of the past, and the country was now a mere weak colony. So these early poets took it upon themselves to try and restore the image of the glorious India, and which whatever way they could, and what better way than to express their feelings and emotions in poetry. So you find some of the um, excellent examples of Madhusudan Dutt's poem is the King Porus, a legend of old, which is an attempt which was made by a poet. And in this poem, that talks about how King Porus chose to battle the Greek invasion led by Alexander and Great, Macedon. So if you read these poems, you will get to know more about it. And and but you see, there was a phase when Michael Vadhusudan that stopped writing in English. So and why did then did such Anglo-centric and intellectual abruptly cease to write in English altogether, and almost exclusively begin to write in Bengali. Once he came back to he came back to Calcutta from Madras. So you find an alternation of heart and mind, at least on the language issue of Michael Madhusudan's part, is evident even in some of his correspondence of the Madras years. And in response to this suggestion, which was made by one of the educationists, J.E.D. Uh, Bethune, that he exercised his literary talents more in Bengali language than in English language. So Michael, wrote back to their common friends, Gordas, Baisak, to whom the suggestion had been made. And then, you know, he had been told that he would be doing, India a great duty and would also receive fame, and which you find in M.K. Naik's book on the history of Indian English, which says employ the taste and talents which he had cultivated by the study of English in improving the standards and adding to the stock of the poems in his own language. So here, and this has been quoted in Prashad, which you find, which you find it in the book of history by Naik. And you find, you see, whatever be the cause, the end result was that he began to write in Bengali, and his Bengali epic Meghavat Kavya, which was published in 1861, is said to be one of the greatest work in English literature. Okay, so Madhusudan, that lived and breathed in India, and this made him a part of the native folklore and mythology, and there were many voices which struggling to be heard within him, and these voices, made sense more or less in proportion to the values which that adhered to and are accepted. And so you find in the middle of this creative struggle, one could see the question of the identity at work. Was that a Hindu or a Christian? Was he a Christian from India or a part of national Christianity? So in the 19th century, you find an Indian individual's psyche which remained confined to the national boundaries. In fact, the transformation from a community identity to a national identity was quite a gigantic task. Living in Indian among Indians and various strata may have pulled that out of his restricted English identity. So turning to the Bengali language also may have proved useful in sorting out the Christian identity of a distinct country. Okay, so this is all about Michael Madhusudan Dutt. Any doubts? Hello. Hello. Are you able to hear me? Hello.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Sangamitra, madam, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, do you have any questions?
No, sir, not more. That some writings of that Madhusudan, that like Sarmishta I have written, Tilotama, Sambhav, and some other writings.
Yeah, you can explore more on. I have just summed up what
Okay.
his works in Bengali.
Yes. Yes,
So
sir.
you can find some more, in the text. If you read, you will find
Yes,
more about
yes,
it.
yes.
Okay. So, So we can end today's session if you don't have any question.
Sir, which will be discussed tomorrow?
Tomorrow, your block one will be discussed, but I am not taking your class. This paper is actually will be taken by Dr. Munira Salim. So she was not available today. So she requested me to take the class. But from tomorrow, she will be taking this class. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Good night.